It is the simplicity of a rectangle-shaped piece of paper with the words Eaton typed down upon the front that is incredibly significant in the history of Wyoming, and more specifically to the history of the University of Wyoming. This controversial artifact encompasses the truth behind the Black 14. It was October of 1969, a peak for the Wyoming Cowboys football team and for the head coach Lloyd Eaton, as they were undefeated and ranked 12th in the nation. Everything was going great for the Wyoming Cowboys until it was time for the game against BYU. As the Brigham Young University is supported by the Mormon Church, they had strict policies against African Americans, while the Wyoming football team included 14 African American players. These players recently learned of the policies restricting black men from priesthood or leadership in the church, which they saw as unjust racial discrimination. This became a problem on the football field as well, when a year earlier the players endured racial slurs and cheap shots during the BYU game, targeting them as individuals rather than playing a fair game. This year was going to be different, however. The 14 black players had decided they wanted to wear black armbands during the game to protest the Mormon Church policies, to make light of the oppression against them. Then it was the day before game. The players, while wearing the black armbands, went to ask their head coach Eaton if they could wear the armbands for the game. Without question or thought, Eaton ultimately dismissed the 14 players from the football team for something they only thought of doing. It was a shock to the players. The next day, even though missing 6 starting players, the all-white Wyoming team beat BYU, and the support for Eaton was still endless. Controversy continued as the dismissed players, now known as the Black 14, along with others in support of the players' civil rights, protested the actions of the coach, which publicized negative impressions of the university and the state of Wyoming as a whole. In return, the next week in a game against San Jose State, fans demonstrated their support of Coach Eaton by wearing new light-colored armbands saying Eaton, whereas the opposing team from San Jose wore black armbands in support of the Black 14. The Cowboys lost every game after, and only won one game the following season. Eaton then left the program. The Black 14 were severely impacted by their label and the stigma it carried with them for the rest of their lives. As for the Wyoming football team, it took 6 years until Wyoming had another winning season and many more years to regain non-racial reputation.
Though the events of the Black 14 are important in many ways, they called attention to 3 main topics. First has to do with discrimination. This event occurred near the end of the years that are grouped and classified as the Civil Rights Movement, which spanned from 1954 to 1968. The 14 African American players were reportedly mistreated by Coach Eaton after various civil rights acts had already been passed. The Black 14 occurrence at UW highlights the truth that laws or legal boundaries instigated by the government can only do so much to protect the rights of American people. Real discrimination is harbored within individuals and is still demonstrated in various ways despite being prohibited by law. Legal action alone cannot stop these issues. The root of the problem lies within the beliefs of individuals. The second main topic is that the Black 14 scenario proves that just as there are groups that show discrimination, there are also groups that show support for those discriminated against. The ASUW government and much of the student body felt great despair for the Black 14 and protested over the issues that occurred in 1969. This event helps us to see that, not just in Wyoming but everywhere, there is a community that is looking out for others, just as there is a community that seems to want to inflict harm. Oftentimes, only the bad groups are portrayed through news, but it is important to seek out the support that is also often present in situations like these. Finally, the Black 14 shed light on the American dream. The American dream portrays the United States as a land of equal opportunity to work hard and succeed. The scenario involving the Black 14 shows quite clearly that the American dream is not a destination. America has not yet reached a point of equality in the nearly 243 years that it has been a nation. Frederick Douglass's speech highlighted in 1852 how far America still had to go in order to provide all of its people with the treatment they deserved. The Black 14 events happened in 1969, and still today, in 2019, there are many issues revolving around discrimination. Though America has made and still is making clear progress, this Wyoming historical event proves that the American dream is not the current state of our country. Instead, it is a distant ideal or set of values that, through striving to obtain, allows our country to grow and develop.
Since the events of the Black 14 at UW, many protests against a variety of policies have taken place against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 1 month after the Black 14 was released from UW, Stanford University announced it will no longer compete against BYU in a variety of sports as a protest against the racial discrimination by the LDS Church. In 1970, a basketball game between BYU and the University of Arizona was disrupted when 9 black students walked onto the court just before halftime to protest these same policies. In 2015, protests were held outside of Temple Square due to an LDS Church policy that prohibits children of same-sex couples to participate in certain ordinances and blessings until they can commit to the church and disavow the practice of same-sex cohabitation in marriage. In 2018, in Salt Lake City, the March for Children protested a policy by the LDS Church that allows bishops to have one-on-one interviews with youth. These interviews were closed-door interviews where children were often asked sexually explicit questions. Sports have continued to be a place of protest, especially in racial issues. In 1996, Muhammad Abdul-Rauf of NBA silently prayed during the national anthem because he saw it as a symbol of oppression and tyranny. In 2004, Carlos Delgado of the MLB refused to stand for God Bless America to protest the participation in the Iraq War. In 2012, Miami Heat players wore hoodies and bowed their heads for the needless killing of Trayvon Martin. In 2012, 4 St. Louis Rams players walked out with the hands up, don't shoot gesture that was used in protests in Ferguson, Missouri, where Michael Brown was killed. In 2014, NBA stars wore I Can't Breathe t-shirts to protest against social injustice following Eric Garner's death. And in 2016, Colin Kaepernick protested the national anthem because of the oppression and inequality of black people. In the last 50 years, protests against the LDS Church have continued, and athletes have continued to use their platform as a place to exercise their freedom of speech, just as the members of the Cowboy football team did in 1969.